A very special Festival of Libraries welcome this week as we come to you live from the beautiful surroundings of the Portico Library. My name's Lynette and I'm from Salford's Working Class Movement Library. And I'm joined today by my colleague Lindsey and by Pat and James from the Portico, where we'll be telling you some tales from the two libraries, some observations on connections between our two very different collections, which the four of us have made as we've spent time in each other's library over the last few weeks. Okay, I will share my own screen today, not the speaker's screen. We hope this will work. Okay, I'm going to hand straight over to James and Pat.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pat, and this is James Moss, our program curator at the Portico Library. I'm the assistant over here. So nice to meet you all, and welcome to the talk. So we're going to do some short introductions for the two libraries before we start our slide. Yep, as you can see at the back here, we're in the Portico Library. We opened since 1806. And to compare with the Working Class Movement Library, which they start to collect their collections in the 1950s by Eddie and Ruth Frau. In terms of the timings, although we are quite different, in a lot of ways, we do share similarities in terms of what we collect and the willfulness of the collections that we can find.
Yeah, we were interested to look at the Working Class Movement Library's collection. And one thing that Pat pointed out very early on was how both of these collections are very much a subjective view of literature and of the world. So Ruth and Eddie Frau, of course, have a very specific area of interest with working class movements. And in the Portico Library as well, even though it wasn't put together, the collection here by two people, it was put together by 400 subscribers through the 19th century. It still represents one particular view of the world. It's quite a homogenous group of people who put that together. Men for the first few decades until the British law changed, allowing women to become members, and of course, you know, more wealthy men. So where both contain quite a lot of books with kind of progressive or radical material, the Porticos obviously contains lots of other books as well, lots of more conservative stuff. And those collectors here were more middle class and even some more wealthy people who had a more sort of philanthropic or that kind of attitude to collecting those kind of books. Whereas Ruth and Eddie Frau's personal collection at the Working Class Movement Library was very much a passion for them, and it was their political ideology that drove them collecting. This picture you can see here is of we took during our trip to the Working Class Movement Library, which was really fascinating. And what you're seeing here is actually some of the rooms that are not normally open to the public just on a normal day. The great thing about the Working Class Movement Library is anybody can just knock on the door and go in and use the reading room and make inquiries during normal times without COVID. But to see all of these extra rooms in Working Class Movement Library, you book a tour. So you can do that by contacting the library. But anybody can do that. So I'd recommend in the future, once things are back to normal, definitely do get in touch with them and do a tour, because it just gives an amazing insight into the extent of this collection that was amassed. There's room after room of interesting stuff. And now, I think it's just been launched in the last, very recently, there's a virtual tour. So visit Working Class Movement Library's website and do the virtual tour, and you can actually go in person again.
They do have amazing podcasts as well, so please visit their website. And also, with the Portico Library side, we are open now since April, and we are serving food as well since last time. It's been so long. And we are launching our new exhibition on the 1st of July, so please stay tuned for that. One thing that I want to point out with this slide particularly is actually what I found is because the Portico Library always built for its purpose, isn't it? It's the two men who started it always wanted this kind of like newsroom and library for Manchester. But in turns, for the Working Class Movement Library, it started at home, which is a personal collection. And as you can see here, where they are right now, which is in Salford, it was a previous nurse house, because it's a home, it's a house. When you walk in, you feel so homey and cozy in a way. And because all the books are in each room, you feel like you are entering Eddie and Ruth's like life's work without feeling anything of that will put you off. So this is like such a great collection that, as you can see, where it started in a home until now, it's still in a home. Yeah. That's what I want to point out.
There's one thing as well about the Portico Library, that even though it was established as a very grand neoclassical Greek revival building built as a library by subscription in 1806, today we have the cafe right in the middle of the book space. So where we're sitting now, we're in our cafe, which is also our exhibition space, and people often comment how domestic and homely it feels. So the character has probably changed quite a lot in those 200 years, although obviously many things are retained. But today it's one of the things that we try to nurture, that kind of domestic feel and like you're actually at home when you're in the front.
Exactly.
So, yeah. We'll pass back over to Lynette.
Exactly. Here we go.
Thank you very much. Well, what a fantastic advert for the library. I didn't pay them, you know. That was really nice. But we've been delighted to welcome Pat and James, and also to have been here. And here's an example of some of the little things that caught my eye while I was starting to research it. It is a fantastic place to sit and research, and as they say, also to sit and have refreshments as well. But I just like that little book plate, and also just that little receipt for all those bottles of turps, which we can only assume must have been for burning in the reading room lamps. Extraordinary amount spent. That's the very first receipt in the book. So I also then looked at some other receipts, and this one on the left, this is from the Portico, and it just reminded me of something, and it was the one that's on the right, which is in our collection. It just seemed a very similar sort of thing, and the one on the right is from the Manchester and Salford Workers' Film Society archive, which we hold. The Society held its first screening in November 1930, and it's the oldest continuing film society in the UK, with the name shortened in 1937 to the Manchester and Salford Film Society. In 2005, their archive, programmes, annual reports, correspondence, etc., was lodged with the library, and we were delighted to help them celebrate their 90th birthday last November by digitising some of their material. There's a small online exhibition on our website, and that's one of the items, which is why it just sort of struck me as a nice similarity. I was reading early minutes, and what a joy that is to sit and read early minutes of all the history of the Portico is here. So it's extraordinary. Here's a list of the newspapers which they took on the 14th of January 1806. There's also, there on the right, they also bought three dozens, I think, of plated candlesticks, so that appealed to me. But the interesting thing about those newspapers is the only one which we have in common is Cobbett's Political Register. We've got a good run of it at the Working Class Movement Library. And William Cobbett started his newspaper, originally supporting the Tories, but he gradually became more radical. And by 1806, he was using it to campaign for parliamentary reform. And we use the Political Register as our main source of evidence for the story of Thomas Paine's bones being brought back to England in 1819. That is a story which people connected to the library will know we celebrated with an extraordinary procession down the Crescent in Salford in November 2019. So, talking about Thomas Paine, James found for me this newspaper called The Sun, no relation, from Christmas Eve 1792, and it's an advert on the left. You possibly, depending on how big your screen is, you might not be able to see it, but it starts Paine Trial, and it's an advert for publication that we've got a second edition copy of in WCML as part of our fantastic collection about the radical thinker, political theorist and writer Thomas Paine. It's by Joseph Gurney, who's a bookseller, and it offers the proceedings on the trial of Thomas Paine for a libel entitled The Rights of Man. Gurney attended the trial and took shorthand notes. The trial was on the 18th of December, so it's smart work to be putting in an advert 6 days later saying that the publication is in the press. The proceedings were directed against the second part of Rights of Man. William Pitt's government, worried by the possibility that the French Revolution might spread to England, had begun suppressing works that espoused radical philosophies. Paine's work, which advocates the right of the people to overthrow government, was therefore duly targeted. The speeches of the Attorney General, Sir Archibald MacDonald, and of Mr. Erskine, counsel for the defendant Thomas Paine, are given in full. MacDonald argued that Paine's work was intended to inflame the British people and distribute radical ideas to those without the political understanding to view them in context. Erskine spoke in Paine's defence about the freedom of the press and the limits on it, arguing that freedom of speech was necessary to identify the flaws in the structure of government and the Constitution. Opinion is free, he said, and conduct alone is amenable to the law. The jury very quickly, however, found Paine guilty. He himself was in France at this time. He'd been elected a member of the National Convention and was busy writing a new constitution. In the 17 months following this trial, 11 publishers of The Rights of Man were prosecuted, receiving prison sentences of up to 4 years. So that was an interesting sidelight on Thomas Paine, great hero to library founders Ruth and Eddie Frow. And the item on the right is the committee minutes just after the Peterloo Massacre. And I'm going to hand back over to James to explain why we've got that there.
Excuse me, have you seen the sign? Somebody's requested subtitles so that they don't need to lip read.
We're not able to. So we're not able to offer that, I'm afraid. We don't have that, other than you. I think there is a closed captions option you can try and do yourself, but we're not able to do anything from here. I'm sorry. When it goes up on our YouTube channel afterwards, there are subtitles which are provided by YouTube. So once this is up on YouTube, you will be able to see it with captions at that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for pointing that out. Yes, the reason that this particular entry in the minute books of the Portico Library is of interest to us is that, following on from the newspaper and the idea of the publication of what was seen at the time by the government as seditious material and their real crackdown on the press and on publishers, a few years later, of course, Peterloo happens in Manchester, one of the enormous events in the democratic rights movement. And it's literally just around the corner from the Portico Library, just at the end of this street here. And we know that members of the Portico Library were involved on both sides. So we had, one of the members was Captain Hugh Hornby Burley, who was the infamous captain who gave the order for the cavalry to attack those peaceful demonstrators. He was a member here, and he was a member of the committee of the library, as was Robert Gregg, who one of the owners of Quarrybank Mill down in Cheshire, who testified against Burley in the subsequent trial that was brought by some of the victims. The government, of course, never brought any cases against the perpetrators, but some of the members of the public did try to, unsuccessfully. So in those trials, there were both sides, members of the Portico were represented. But this particular entry from the minutes that you can see on the right does not contain Burley as a member of the committee. Now, this is September, which is the month following Peterloo. So we knew that in the previous month he was a member of the committee, and by this point he's not. And we just think that's quite interesting. Obviously, we can never know what exactly has gone down. But another thing that I heard, which is quite interesting, was his house was very close by here. And for years after Peterloo, on the anniversary, victims, families gathered outside his house to just hum and boo just all day, just as a way of sort of reminding him, and as a kind of peaceful vigil. Which must have been pretty moving, I would have thought. We put an exhibition on in 2019 called Making the News. So if you visit the Portico Library's website and click on What's On and Past Exhibitions, this newspaper was in that, as well as lots of interesting artworks by contemporary artists about the kind of aftermath of Peterloo. And a couple of other members here who responded, other Portico Library members, were John Edward Taylor and the other founders of the Guardian newspaper, which again was founded in response to the government crackdown on the freedom of the press following the Peterloo Massacre.
Okay, and I think the next slide does show a Peterloo item which we showed to James and Pat when they came to the library. That's a map of where the Peterloo Massacre took place. So I'm still looking at the minutes here, and this, I hope you can see, is the September the 14th, 1820. It really is fascinating to read these, and you look at this and it says something about newspapers being discontinued until the proceedings on the Bill of Pains and Penalties is resolved. And so I thought, what is the Bill of Pains and Penalties? Now, as some of you probably know, it relates to the schism between George IV and his wife, Queen Caroline, who'd married in 1795 when George was Prince of Wales and known as a gambler, a womanizer, and a heavy drinker. Subsequently, rather unsurprisingly, they lived apart. On the death of his father in 1820, George became king. Caroline returned to England to claim her rights as queen. George IV, as he then was, persuaded the government to bring in a bill before Parliament, the Bill of Pains and Penalties, which would dissolve their marriage and deprive Caroline of the title Queen. The Whigs opposed the measure, and there were public demonstrations against the new king. Now, here are a couple of items from the Working Class Movement Library that relate to this period. George was living an extravagant life on the taxes collected by Parliament, whereas Caroline appeared to live modestly. Satirists and cartoonists published prints in support of Caroline and depicted George as debauched and licentious. She became a figurehead for the growing radical movement demanding political reform. She allied herself with radical campaigners such as William Cobbett, whom we met earlier. And it was probably Cobbett who wrote these words of Caroline's: "If the highest subject in the realm can be deprived of her rank and title, can be divorced, dethroned and debased by an act of arbitrary power in the form of a bill of pains and penalties, the constitutional liberty of the kingdom will be shaken to its very base. The rights of the nation will be only a scattered wreck, and this once free people, like the meanest of slaves, must submit to the lash of an insolent domination." That does sound like Cobbett. The day before the bill was due to start being debated, an open letter from Caroline to George, again probably written by Cobbett, was published widely. In it, she claimed she was the victim of conspiracy and intrigue and demanded a fair trial. The passage of the bill through Parliament was very much seen as being the Queen on trial. So the proceedings went ahead, starting in August 1820, with the nation in a state of high drama. And those Portico minutes that we saw, here they are again, were written during the course of the bill being debated. So it looks as if there was a decision to discontinue taking some newspapers until after the controversy was over. The bill passed in the Lords in November 1820 by a narrow margin. Prime Minister Lord Liverpool, however, in a highly emotional state, declared that since the vote was so close and public tensions were so high, the government was withdrawing the bill before it got to the House of Commons. Crowds celebrated in the streets, the windows of government supporters were smashed, and the offices of newspapers that had supported the king were set alight. One item in the WCML collection is by radical printer and satirist William Home, who'd successfully defended himself in 1817 in 3 high-profile prosecutions for blasphemous and seditious libel. It's called "The Form of Prayer with Thanksgiving to Almighty God, to be used daily by all devout people throughout the realm for the happy deliverance of Her Majesty Queen Caroline from the late most traitorous conspiracy." And we also have a bound volume of pamphlets which relate to these same events, with some excellent titles, including "A Groan from the Throne." There was further drama when Caroline appeared at George's coronation the next year, in July 1821. She was turned away from the doors of Westminster Abbey. This caused further public demonstrations, but these stopped when Caroline herself died suddenly on the 7th of August, 1821. So I'll just whiz you through a few of the things I found while looking at these early minutes. And they also write very carefully all the things which have arrived. And so we know what books arrived in the Portico Library when. It's a fantastic record. Here we see Gaskell's manufacturing population of England. Peter Gaskell, I don't think any relation to the Gaskells we know. So this was brought into the collection here in the Portico in 1833. And here's a quote from the book. "Any man who has stood at 12 o'clock at the single narrow doorway which serves as the place of exit for the hands employed in the great cotton mills must acknowledge that an uglier set of men and women, of boys and girls, taking them in the mass, it will be impossible to congregate in a smaller compass." This book was famous at the time for highlighting injuries in factories and particularly the horrors of child labour. And here we have the Parliamentary Report on Colonial Slavery and the reports of the Factories Inquiry Commission, and they were brought into the Portico's collection in October 1833. And I was interested also in women authors. Characteristics of Women was agreed to be bought on the 11th of October 1832. This is by Anna Jameson and is the first attempt by a woman to analyse the characteristics of heroines in Shakespeare's plays. We see that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was bought on the 1st of December 1831. And it's just fascinating. There's all manner of things. There's things that we're going to kind of try and follow up about Percy Shelley as well. So watch this space, maybe a follow-up talk. Okay, I'm now going to pass over to my colleague Lindsey, who's been looking at different aspects of the connections between us. Over to you, Lindsey.
Thank you. So I'm the library assistant at the Working Class Movement Library, so I guess that is the approach I come from when I came to look at the collection here. So it's been interesting because of each in our job roles have probably looked at things in different ways, and that's been quite fascinating to see what people have come up with. So I visited the Portico just passing through on it previously. I haven't visited and actually looked at any of the material, to my shame. And one of the first things I'd like to say is that they have a pub downstairs and a cafe in their reading room. And so envy is the first thing that I felt for that. And they're also very handily on, once you've got to them, on one floor. And as people will know who visited our library, and James and Pat will know when they went round, we're scattered over a number of floors, and it's my job to run around picking out material for people. So we can't offer people nice refreshments in the way that the Portico can, and do come to the cafe if you can, it does look wonderful. But very often people will know that when they've been to talks at the library, and in occasions in the past, the Frowes have very much wanted people to stay and behind after events, meet like-minded people over a cup of tea and a biscuit. So that's always continued, and that's a nice thing. And we have missed that in lockdown, and hopefully we're moving in the right direction now. So as was touched on, it's been interesting because the Portico was obviously purpose-built as a library, whereas the Working Class Movement Library, it's housed now, to give it its proper title, Jubilee House, was a nurse's home. And that causes obstacles that you kind of have to come over in what we do. So when it came, we moved to the Working Class Movement Library in Salford. We moved it there in the 1980s. With Eddie and Ruth moving in at the same time, which is quite a lovely story to know that when their collection moved, they moved with it because they continued to enjoy meeting people and sharing their knowledge with people who visited the collection. But it just threw up obstacles in the fact that upstairs, if you wander around, there are rooms that were essentially bedrooms for the nurses, who used to live there originally. So the books can go around, the bookshelves that we have in every room can go around the perimeter of the rooms, but they can't go across. So restrictions on space happen as a result of that. But I do know that the Portico, having been here, was over 2 floors originally. So they've had to adapt to the fact that now they just have a single floor space, although I think, watch this space, possibly, hopefully that might be moving in the near future. So you'll probably hear more about that soon. So I was interested in looking at items both libraries have, because both libraries appear very different, but there is some crossover. I mean, the Portico, the majority of their stock is much earlier than ours, but there is some crossover and some interesting items that I came across. So we both now have online catalogues. So before I came here, I had a little fish about on the Portico Library's catalogue, which is online, available to anybody. And I just did a quick search, and this is what I came up with. I was looking at socialism, because we have such a large collection in our library. I thought, I wonder what they have on that, because such an important part of our library, that movement is huge. And they do have quite a bit, which was very pleasing to know. But they also have, sorry, lost my space. So what you have to do if you come to visit, so you pick things out on the collection, on the the online catalogue, and then you request what you come to look at, and that happens at the Portico, as far as I'm aware. That's the usual routine, and that happens with us at the Working Class Movement Library. So the online catalogue has been a great asset in us widening our scope of people who can come and visit us, because people can simply find out what we have, which was obviously a major obstacle previously, and we were lucky that we got funding to be able to do that. So as I said, I've looked at socialism because there's a book that I know we've had in our collection for quite many years, which is called The Intelligent Woman's Guide to Socialism. And it always makes me laugh. It just sort of is almost now a comical title. And the book, it was written by George Bernard Shaw. And as a woman, it kind of makes me bristle a little bit that, you know, this man has written this book and he's aiming at intelligent women. George Bernard Shaw was better known as a playwright, but was a great socialist, and he wrote a number of things on socialism, essays on socialism, and was part of the Fabian Society. The Fabian Society still exists today and maintains strong links on the political left. So he considered it to be the first economics and political science written specifically for women. And he came to write the book because his sister-in-law, apparently, Lady Mary Stuart Cholmondeley, I'm sorry if I apologise if I said that wrong, she asked him to give a few of your ideas on socialism. And I imagine she had quite a shock, because he came back with quite a big tome, which I'm holding in my hand at the Portico, which was beautiful hardback with Celtic design, given a nod, obviously, I'd imagine, to Bernard Shaw's roots. So it's takes quite long to read and digest, although it's very interesting. So, like I said, it's the fact that nowadays that title just would never be allowed to happen, really. It seems really kind of patronising to say that. So it was published in 1928, and then it was republished in 1937. So we have, that's the WCML online catalogue. I've done a search there, as you can see, for women in socialism. If I just looked up socialism, I would have about 1,000 hits, but there we've got women in socialism. I've narrowed it down to about 31. So that's the first copy that I was talking about, the Celtic bound copy. And then in 1937, Pelican Books started up running, and they produced this volume. And because the world had moved on in that 10 years, Bernard Shaw asked for, could he add in some additional items? So, of course, sadly, there was a rise in fascism, a greater interest in Sovietism or communism. So he added those into the title. And it was interesting because Alan Lane, who was the founder of Penguin Books, chose this as one of the first titles to be published, which is interesting that he chose it in itself, but also it's nice that it became available in a paperback edition, because obviously the beautiful bound volume that we have and the Portico have would have been out of the reach of most ordinary women at that time. So that was kind of the point of Pelican Books. So I will admit to you, I've not read George Bernard Shaw cover to cover, but he does, to be fair to him, he makes some very good points. It's dated, obviously, but there are some things that are still relevant today. So he talks about, he's very witty throughout, but he talks about subjects still relevant today, like universal basic income and the monetary value of taking care of children. And I'll quote him here: "The most important and indispensable work of women, that of bearing and rearing children and keeping house for them, was never paid for directly to the woman, but always through the man. And so many foolish people came to forget that it was work at all, and spoke of man as the breadwinner. This was nonsense." So hear to that. So I have to give him credit where it's due. But what also tickled me about this is there's two replies to Bernard Shaw on the back of this. And the first one was printed a year later in 1929. We have it in our collection at the WCML. And that is called The Socialist Woman's Guide to Intelligence, which is a reply to Mr. Shaw. So this was by Lillian Lemazure, who I don't know a great deal about, although I have a couple of books about her in the library. I couldn't find a great deal on her. And she's dedicated to my sisters, the women who think, and the women who don't think much yet. So this is quite telling because it's of the time. So 1928, as you may well be aware, was the time when all women are then allowed to vote. So this is quite a significant time in history for women in general. And I think that's what she's alluding to there. It's another lengthy text. It's about half the size of Bernard Shaw's, but it does pick apart his text, kind of index following his index almost identically. And she's more bothered by points on socialism as opposed to what I was kind of looking at was the title of his book. So then we come to my favourite find in the library, which is written by a lady called Minnie Palester. And this is and the title of this, it's only a little pamphlet, it's not a book, it's short and to the point. And this title is Socialism for Women, not only the intelligent women, but for all women. Because of course, that was the point. And what I found interesting in studying this is our library is seen as, you know, promoting socialism and all that. And in socialism, everybody is meant to be equal, man, woman, regardless of class. So that's what Minnie Palester, I think the point she's trying to make, that even though George Bernard Shaw is saying he's a socialist and he wants everybody to be equal, and he does argue for that, the fact that he named his book The Intelligent Guide is something that, yeah, obviously bristled other women as well as myself, thankfully, so I'm pleased about that. So Minnie Palester is an interesting character. So she was actively involved in the Independent Labour Party and rose through the ranks, and in 1926 became the first woman member of the National Executive Council of the Labour Party. She also wrote a number of other pamphlets for the Independent Labour Party. You can see the little logo on the back bottom right-hand side of it there. In her book that you can see on the right, I said she wrote a few things, and she's a great propagandist for socialists and very much turning women to socialism, encouraging women to get involved and seeing it from a women's perspective. That women couldn't easily attend meetings and things like that. So she gave examples of how to kind of overcome the obstacles that many women faced in being involved in politics, even though they'd been given the vote. So in her book, The Orange Box, I'm always interested in dedications, and she dedicates the book to ordinary people who have not much time to read big books. This little book is dedicated. It's only about 50 pages long, in the hope that it may perchance help them to play their part in the commonwealth that is to be. So clearly saying, all women need to be involved in this. We're going to make a better world. We all need to move forward together. So as I said, Bernard Shaw's text is dated and a little bit condescending at times, but has great merit in the points he's trying to make. And I'll leave you this quote from Polly Toynbee, who looked again at Shaw's text in 2012. And this was on the back, really, of the crash of 2008. So she says, Shaw's clarity of argument and caustic wit prod and question the weary old age reasons why. The world must be as it is, and nothing will ever change. Here are all the reasons why how we live now, as then, is insupportable, inexcusable, immoral, and unhappy for too many. All it takes, he says, is enough who want to change it. All writers can do is to keep making the case for something better. I'll hand you back to Lynette. Is it Pat? Sorry.
Thank you, Lindsey. That was a great addition to the collection. Well, everyone, this is published, but this is from my point of view when I visit the working class movement libraries. So as you can tell, I'm not from Manchester, from Thailand. And so I'm particularly very drawn to and captured by this, which is a map back in 1832. This was a scrapbook that is called the Angles in Manchester Scrapbook, compiled by Roy Whitfield, who's a writer. At that time, he was researching for his book that's called Frederick Engels in Manchester. And this was a huge red book in the collection that Lynette and Lindsey got out for us. And I was particularly drawn to it because I said I'm not from Manchester, and to see how the city formed its glory over the years with the books, monographs, maps, and photography. It's great because it provides this visual that intersect with what Manchester is right now that we could see out of the window. So back to this map. This is actually Deansgate. And you could see at the right-hand side, there's like this red highlight there that say Deansgate and also Thompson Street on the left. At the time, it said that it stayed here that it was a fertile source of disease. These 30 houses have just one privy or toilet to share between the residences. This is shocking, like new material for me to learn, because I always thought as Manchester to be like a fast forward with like always, you know, glorious housing and everything, but it's not. And also, as you can see here, that this is very like a report, obviously. And the next one I'm going to show you is Deansgate right now. This is from Google Maps that I captured. As you can see, the Deansgate on the right-hand side and the Hardman Street on the middle there. Everything's changed. All the houses were demolished, of course, because it was cancelled as the Public Act. I'm sorry, I just need to. Yeah, the Public Health Act, when the Public Health Act was introduced. As you can see now, it's all changed. It's restaurants, it's accommodations, and also if you know about NOMA, which is still building in Manchester at the moment, when they excavating the area, they found these style housings, more than hundreds of them there, and now they're building NOMA. It's very interesting to me to see the transition over there actually. This is another map that's quite interesting to see. As you can see, that it's called Little Ireland. At first, I'm quite captured by, oh, I know there's loads of Irish people migrate to Manchester because of the potato famine. This is exactly it. This is exactly the crucial evidence of that. This is near Oxford Road, and also you can see the River Medlock down there. Right now, if you Google it, it's actually student accommodation. It's huge, like, you know, the loads of apartments going on. Back then, this is Little Ireland, it was the dwellings of thousands and thousands of Irish people who migrate from Ireland because of the potato famine to Manchester, seeking jobs and opportunity to work in mills and also railway buildings. Let's see, in the same kind of year, in 1830s, actually it's a year that Liverpool, Manchester and railway opened. So this is like loads of people who work there would live here. And it is stated that this is crucial evidence of Manchester's growth, that it rests largely on the growth of the cotton industry, as you might know. And by mid-century, the city typified Britain as the workshop of the world. Young men and women poured in from the countryside, eager to work in the new factory and mills. At the start of 18th century, you will be shocked with this, I just know this. Manchester was a small market town with a population just 10,000. That's a population of us. And by the end of the century, we skyrocket tenfold to 89,000 souls. This is because of the Industrial Revolution and the growth of mills. This is one of the photographs that's really shocking to me. At first, I don't even know what the word back-to-back houses are or what does it mean. But these back-to-back houses, surprisingly, they share party walls on 3 of their 4 sides. Back-to-back, just if you can imagine in your head, it means that only one wall of your house that has a door and window. So at the back of like all 3 other walls would connect it to other house, which is like in the same row. It was cheap to build a house like this because it's safe, the cost of drainage and roofing by sharing it. And one house would have just a single room on each floor and no damp proofing. Owners of mills and mines built significant numbers of back-to-back houses like this in Manchester, in Leeds, in Birmingham. That could, because that would lease amount of space while keeping the cost low and keep workers living near the mills. And luckily, this style of housing was banned in 1844, later on demolished. But you can still see this style of houses in Leeds and Birmingham. Sadly, it's called tourist attraction spot. They're still keeping it so people can study. This is quite shocking to me to learn this, but actually it's quite important because if you see this one, which is an illustration, this set of illustration shows the cellar dwellings. This is even worse. I didn't even know this exists. This is, as it says, cellar dwelling means people who live just under the cellar of houses. In Manchester, many studies later in the 1990s that I found was that the poor would live in the cellar in many areas, such as Salford, Rochdale, and in Stockport as well. It is the worst housing condition in a fast building town like Manchester in the 19th century. And as you can see, it's the result of overcrowding. And in contemporary ordnance survey maps, it shows the city hardly expanded in an area like this. Instead, more and more people cram into the same space, which caused, as you might know, the 2 cholera in the 1831 and 32 later on. At the time, during the cholera, of course, many homes remained without clean pipes water or flushing toilets until the end of the century. This change in 1848 that I point out before, which is a Public Health Act, that plays with my head so much I can't say it right. It's the first step on the road to improve overall health of England. It is considered that the most important step to improve health were these steps, which is improve drainage of the house, remove or refuse from houses, streets and roads, clean drinking water, and appointment of medical officer for each town. And for this, I want to point out one connection that when I talked to James Moss, our curator, was the connection with the Portico and also this era of time. It is actually William Gaskell and Elizabeth Gaskell that you might have known. Our longest serving chair, William Gaskell, supported public health measure as well, housing reform through his charitable works. He was a committee member of Manchester and Salford Sanitary Association. He also taught at Manchester Mechanic Institute. The goal was to provide education for mill workers and improve living conditions. That's one of our longest serving chairs. And at the same time, as well, his wife, Elizabeth Gaskell, published her first book that's called Mary Barton, A Tale of Manchester Life in 1848. As you could see over here, you flick through, this is the first edition that we got hold of in the library. This is in French, that's why it said Marie Barton instead of Mary. It is very, very fragile and very tightly bound. So I'm just gonna have a peek through just a tiny bit. And as you can see, there's still evidence of loads of people were borrowing this book. We still have this. And when you flick around, you see that is stated, presented by the chairman here. So you want to have a look at this book and also our huge collection of Elizabeth Gaskell, please visit us and I'll help you with that. It's just very fascinating that everything ties together. And of course, when she published this book, the story is set in the English city of Manchester between 1839 to 42 and deals with difficulties faced by the Victorian working class. And yeah, that's the point that I want to make today, that we have come so far from that point. And thank, I don't know, everyone, William Gaskell and everyone, including Ringgold, who point out this and research about this for so long ago, now that we have proper house to live in. And I think for now, I'm just gonna wrap up my point and then pass it on to James Moss for him to talk about for his topics. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Pat. That was really interesting. The point about Elizabeth Gaskell and William Gaskell is interesting in several ways. I mean, we often talk about our longest serving chair, William, for all the different things that he was involved in Manchester, and Elizabeth, of course. And in fact, yesterday was the announcement for the Portico Prize for Literature. So if you have a look on our social media and on the website, you'll see that the Portico Prize has now gone live and it's calling for applications, and it's the prize for the book that best evokes the spirit of the North. And of course, Mary Barton is possibly one of the very first really, really popular books that was published back in the 19th century that introduced lots of people to life in northern cities like Manchester. William Gaskell was also a lifelong friend of Samuel Bamford, which takes us back to Peterloo. Samuel Bamford was one of the leaders of the demonstrators at the Peterloo Massacre. And he writes in his autobiography, his life of Samuel Bamford, which we have a copy of, and the Working Class Movement Library have a copy of course. He writes years later after Peterloo, how when they were walking from way out of Manchester, walking into town, into the city to come to St. Peter's Field, just down the road, that they made a point of walking past the door of the Portico Library down Mosley Street, because at that time it was where all the refined houses were, all of those wealthy people that they needed to influence and really needed to get the message to. So his autobiography is something that you can look at. Anybody can start a research project here at the Portico Library. So although we're still a subscription library, just like we were in 1806, and you can still become a subscriber if you want to support the library and use Historic Reading Room. If you've got any kind of interests that you want to do research into, it doesn't have to be academic, you don't need references from a university. get in touch with us and we'll find material and you can look at it. We really want to encourage as many people to do projects with this material as we can. And one of the particular focuses is, of course, uncovering more of that working class history, because it's little kind of known about within the collection here. Other early members were people like Richard Cobden, who started the Anti-Corn Law League, who you may know about, you know, another anti-poverty campaigning group that very influential. And just going back to those minute books that we saw earlier from the Portico, that script, that handwriting that you saw, that beautiful writing, it could be the handwriting of the first secretary here, unless we had a scribe, but possibly not, because you know, just for minutes you probably have the secretary writing. If it is, then that's the handwriting of Peter Mark Roget, as in Roget's thesaurus, because he was our first secretary for several years here. So there's lots of very interesting characters, and it's worth finding out. Just a couple of last photos that I took while we were at the Working Class Movement Library. As it happens, you had scaffolding going up on the day that we were there, so it was interesting. Yeah, lots of work going on. And there's Pat just having a look in their reading room there at some of that material. But it really was a fascinating day, and I hope to come back soon once things are all back up and running and back to normal.
Right, you have heard from all four of us, and this is our final slide. This is from early on in the minutes of the Portico, and you see that the person who was in charge of the reading room was given the privilege of selling to any of the members, the proprietors, soups, tea, coffee, jellies, ices, orgeat, lemonade, or any other refreshment excepting fermented or spirituous liquors. So I leave you with a picture of the extremely nice soup that I had when I was here doing my research, because the wonderful system continues from all that time ago up until the present day.
With one change, Lynette, we can now serve spiritualism.
Yes,
so
now they.
enjoy a glass of wine.
Yes, you can now enjoy a glass of wine. If you didn't hear that, that's an important thing to know. So we've had a whale of a time, as you can see, just touching the surface, as I said at the beginning, of many points of connection, possible points of connection between our libraries. So I am going to stop sharing now. Now, it's been an unusual sort of talk. We normally have a Q&A, and I'm very happy to for us to be taking questions at this point. I don't know whether, because it's been so different, whether people have questions, but if you do, would you like to wave at me? I'll move to gallery view. So I will also check if there's anything in the chat that I need to. Right, okay. You can write something in the chat if you wish to, but okay. Barry and Jenny, are you waving at me? Yes.
Jenny's going to get the chat.
Okay. Yeah. So you need to. Can you unmute yourself?
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. That was fascinating. Know the Portico very well. Have yet to visit your library. Won't be long. I just wondered if you had, as a result of your working together, were any sort of plans to do parallel exhibitions, given the parallels you've come up with. It seems an obvious direction to go in.
Well, we certainly have. The Festival of Libraries has brought us together, but actually it's been something that I've been at the Working Class Movement Library for 15 years, and I have wanted to be sitting in this reading room doing this all this time. So it's a huge treat, and it certainly feels like it should be the start of something and not a one-off. So absolutely, we need to be thinking in the future about how we might want to do things. The Port have got a really, really interesting range of events and exhibitions, and they're looking at their collections in a very interesting way. So I think there are all sorts of possibilities that we could use in future.
Well, there seem to be endless anniversaries, centenaries, bicentenaries, half centenaries that you could pick material out of.
Yes, absolutely. Does anybody want to add to that, or we'll just put our thumb? We'll all put our thumbs up to that one. Yes, thank you for the prompt. Yeah. Pia, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes. Hello. I haven't been a researcher very much, but I've been to events at both the Working Class Movement Library and at the Portico Library. And can I say, I would love it if you could get more of a coffee and biscuit at the Working Class Movement Library on a regular basis. But that's a minor point. What I feel the real cutting edge of the Working Class Movement Library is it's the history of the working class written by working class people themselves, and really part of the movement. And even the movements, you know, I'm getting to be a historical relic myself, but even the political and economic and social movements that I've been involved with, they will be lost unless they're recorded in places like the Working Class Movement Library. You know, women's rights, national abortion campaign, the struggle for Ireland, for the peace movement. All of these are reflected to some extent in the Working Class Movement Library. And all right, we've concentrated, and of course you're looking for similarities. You concentrated on the early history, and that was written by middle class people, even if they were sympathetic to working class. But I wondered in the Portico Library whether there are any materials actually written or reflecting the spoken word of working class groups or working class individuals.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's something that we're looking a lot at this year. In fact, we've commissioned a few coming up later in the year. In the autumn, we're doing sort of much more auditing, as it were, of you know, what is here in the collection. Because of course we don't, you know, 25,000 books, there's things we don't know about. But in terms of representation, not just for working class people, but for people of colour and for women and all sorts of people who are marginalised or not represented at that time as much, we really want to know what's here. The short answer is not much. We know that there's not very much at all in terms of being representative or having diversity of voices and perspectives. But what there is interesting clues, and actually sometimes because there isn't very much, we have to do a lot more work with contemporary writers and artists and people now who are bringing sort of their perspectives. So that's what we try to do with all our exhibitions. Just in terms of kind of those less represented voices, one or two items that we have come across that are slightly interesting. I mentioned Samuel Bamford's life, so he wrote that himself. He was a working person, and he and one or two other things like that to do with kind of Lancashire dialects and things like that. So the words and the vocabulary and the vernacular of people is quite interesting. We've got quite a lot on that. But again, there'd probably always be a middle class influence in the publishing or the writing, just as frankly there is today in publishing. You know, it's another part of what the prize tries to do, to try to kind of diversify publishing as an industry. And in terms of sort of people of colour and other struggles, we have come across one interesting item, which is the autobiography of Samuel Ringgold Ward. So he was formerly enslaved. He was born into slavery in America. He was a Black American man, and he came to the UK. He did come to Manchester, so we've got every reason to believe he might have visited here and might have given us the book himself, because there were lots of abolitionists here in the 19th century, lots of anti-slavery campaigners. So that's just very interesting to see his own words written on the page. So yeah, we want to do some more research into that book. On our website, there's a page for the collection, and if you scroll down and click on treasures, his book is on there. So if you click on there, then you'll see a couple of other voices represented.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Pete. I see a note from Gillian about back-to-backs. Pat. She says that close to the Headingley stadiums in Leeds, there were streets of back-to-back still inhabited, though these days I think mainly by students.
Oh wow, that's a good point to know that there's still inhabitants there. Thank you for pointing that out.
Okay, I don't think there's anything else to pick up. Yes, thank you, my colleague Jane, who's holding the fort back at the library. Thank you very much, Jane. While Lindsey and I have been doing this, Jane has just been holding the fort back there, and we look forward to Jane being able to come here and find out a bit more about the Portico as well, because it's certainly well worth doing. So she's pointed out that yes, we do not serve spirituous liquors at the Working Class Movement Library because our founders were very strong teetotalers. although there was something so that somebody has come across recently about some mention of a cheese and wine party that was held. And I don't know if that's sort of that non-alcoholic wine, but anyway, there was something from the 70s which needs to be followed up, I think. As anybody else want to wave at me with a question or a comment? Barbara, are you waving at me? Yes. Hello, would you like to unmute yourself? Can't hear you well, Barbara.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Okay, I have to hold it right close. I'm really just curious, for you particularly, in 30 years' time, how much working class material will you have since it's all done online now?
My good friend Barbara of probably 30 years standing to come up with a complicated question. Thank you for that, Barbara. Well, that is an interesting one, certainly. And what we are doing is trying to get more digital stuff. It's really hard, but we've been putting calls out for digital material to be deposited. It's really hard for people, I think, if they're in the middle of a campaign to think, I ought to be collecting this for the future. Sometimes people do, and that's brilliant. We've done a couple of pilot projects where we've collected on a couple of recent disputes, the Debenhams dispute, and we chose the Go Northwest bus drivers, which was a brilliant one because they won the case. So we have recently been collecting on the fire and rehire dispute, which was at the Cheetham Hill bus garage. And so that starts to show us just how difficult it is to be trying to collect digitally because it's very time consuming. So this is a good time for me to put a call out. If people are involved in a dispute or a campaign, a radical campaign, we really are interested in having your material sent to us digitally or still as leaflets, of course. But yeah, we're starting to dip our toe in the water. It's all sorts of interesting stuff about how you store it in order to hope that in 30 years time it's still going to be readable, because if you've got the equivalent of 3-inch floppy disks, then that's not going to be much help, is it? So yeah, we've had help from archivist Heather Roberts in helping us think about the formats in which we should be collecting digitally for the best chance of preserving things.
Doing ours as well. We've got a large collection of there's a mine of wires at the back of me, sorry. So we do have a large collection of cassette tapes, don't we, which means that I give them to some undergraduates and they look at me blankly when I present them with a cassette player. I have to explain how you use it. But we're digitizing a lot of our tapes so that to make them more easily accessible, because we have various interviews with fascinating people from the Communist Party through to some of the Women Against Pit Closures, I think is on tape, isn't it, with interviews with the women involved with that. So yeah, we're moving towards that, aren't we? We're as ever constrained by finance and time. We're very much missing our volunteers at the moment, because obviously a lot of them with the COVID restrictions have not come back as yet, and we're putting things in place, as I'm sure the Portico are. I mean, you will be missing your volunteers as well. As institutions that have to support themselves, we rely heavily on volunteers to support our work. So yeah, we are getting things done, aren't we? It just takes time.
Thanks, Lindsay. Now, Robert, where are you? You are waving. Says, oh, there you are. Yes, I see. Hang on. Let's unmute you. Yes. Can you unmute yourself?
Hello.
Hello.
That was great. I really enjoyed that. Yes, you could almost have made the exhibition for me. So thank you. And I'm also thinking, you know, from we end up with Women Against Pit Closures. We start with Women Against Pit. There's an exhibition in there somewhere. Yeah, on the idea of you know, a joint exhibition, I think this would be a brilliant idea. And you know, since Peterloo, you know, I always imagined there'd be some huge Peterloo exhibition somewhere in Greater Manchester where everything from all the different collections would all turn up by some kind of magic. But I now know how difficult it is and how expensive to arrange these loans is. But I still think it's a good idea to have joint exhibitions, not least because with radical activity, Cheetham's the Portico Library has all the conservatives, all the Tories stuff. The working class movement library tends to have the opposite. Although, as you know very well, you've got Robert Walmsley's Peterloo material and Hulson's notebooks and so on as well. And so it's often, it's the authorities who often have the juiciest and the most incriminating stuff. And if you're going to do history from below, it's often history from above, kind of viewed in reverse. I think it'd be wonderful to put together the kinds of things that both libraries have. And in fact, both libraries would surprise each other by having stuff from the opposite side as well. And it's also very true of Chetham's library too. A lot of the establishment stuff is in Chetham's library, but you need to go there if you're researching the radicals. So I'd be very happy to help with any possible joint exhibition. My particular thought is, you mentioned Samuel Bamford. I mean, Samuel Bamford is absolutely made for that, because there is material on Bamford in all the libraries and archives in Greater Manchester and further afield that would go together absolutely beautifully, including Bamford turns up in Mary Barton. So you've got the Mary Barton book here, you've got Gaskell's House. He's doing his own version of Tim Bobbin's dialect. The Chetham's library has Tim Bobbin's original letters and plenty of editions. And the John Rylands library has Bamford's manuscript of his Lancashire dialect, which he began at round about the time of, in fact, before Mary Barton. He was already cooperating with Gaskell and the Lytton Phil. So you can see you've got a beautiful small exhibition that's a moment scattered in bits. And maybe, even if you couldn't get all the objects together in one single place, unless it was a circulating van perhaps, you could have a virtual exhibition all in one place that would link the libraries together, and then you could encourage people to move on from one to another in a kind of trail, either a Samuel Bamford trail or a libraries trail. So you could link them in that way. And of course, it's the smaller libraries that would have most to gain, by association with the bigger ones.
Oh yeah, fascinating thoughts there. As you'll probably know, this is the start of the inaugural Festival of Libraries for Greater Manchester, but there's certainly the intention that carries on in future years. A lot of what's happening this year, including the trails between libraries, is being done virtually, and people, instead of actually being guided in groups, are doing it on their own. So we're making the most of the situation, but hopefully in years to come it will be possible to do things which are more obviously structured together, and sort of bringing people together and books together is obviously something that we would love to do. So yeah, I think we'll be following that up with you, Robert. Yes, yeah. Anybody else got anything to add? Do you want to? Yeah.
We've got and just to make people aware, we have a new kid on the block. So we do have a new library opening in Manchester. That's part of MMU, but will exist in its own right as well. So it's open to all, not just to the students. And that's the new poetry library, which opening was delayed. It should have opened in March. I think it should have opened just as lockdown started, sadly, last year. But that's going to open in the future. So that's a new one to take in and put on your map of tours of libraries, because there was an intention that we would move around, as Lynette said, when the new library opened. People would go there, they would come to us, come here, come to Chetham's, and that sadly hasn't happened as yet. But yeah, that's a new one to look out for on your list of events and things like that, because I'm sure they'll be running lots from there as well.
Just before we say goodbye, I just want to highlight another event that we're running at the Portico Library for Festival Libraries as well. It's the free drop-in session to do collages pieces that's inspired by our collection with Meha Hindosha, our artist in residency. At the moment, we have a little area at the back which showing her collage piece as well as a pop-up exhibition. So it's free to enter, of course, and for the drop-in session with Meha is tomorrow from 11 to 3. So if anyone's got time and want to participate in this drop-in, please drop in. You don't need to book, but if you would like to book, you can call the library. I just want to highlight that. But yeah, I think we have all come to the conclusion today. I hope you enjoyed what we have brought today for you. And yeah, it's such a pleasure for us to be here to tell you this story. Thank you, every support. I think I'm just handing it over to Lynette to say goodbye, but thank you so much, everyone.
Yes, for some of you, this is a one-off talk, and that's great. But for many of you, you join us regularly on a Wednesday. So we just wanted to make sure that everybody is very welcome to join us. We're normally a 2 o'clock Wednesday talk, and it's always free on Zoom. So this time next week, we're back to the 2 o'clock slot. And so on the 16th of June, we have a talk called What is Big Flame? Exploring a Revolutionary Socialist Feminist Organisation, 1970 to 84. That's a fantastic thing to say, sitting under the Portico Dome. So speaker Kerry McGivron will be sharing with us the results of her research, which has included much time spent in the Working Class Movement Library Reading Room. So thank you very much, folks, for staying with us and for sharing this experiment with us as we all zoomed in and out of shot on Zoom. So take care, everybody, and as I always sign off, in solidarity from all at the Portico and from the Working Class Movement Library. Goodbye.